The Galactic Council chamber stretched wide and tall, filled with beings from 1,000 different worlds. Haiyan Wu sat in the human section, his dark suit pressed and neat, watching as the council members argued about shipping routes. He had been Earth's ambassador for 7 years now. 7 years of meetings just like this one. Councillor Velther stood at the central podium, his blue skin shimmering under the lights. He was speaking about the new trade agreement, his voice booming across the chamber. Then he paused and looked toward the human delegation with what passed for a smile among his people. Of course, we must remember that some species let their emotions cloud their judgment, Velther said. Humans, for instance, allow sentiment to interfere with logical decisions. It's quite primitive, really. Laughter rippled through the chamber. Not cruel laughter, but the casual kind that comes when everyone agrees with a joke. Haiyan Wu wrote something in his datapad. Beside him, Dae Young gripped the armrest of his chair. The military liaison's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. They had learned long ago that objecting only brought more mockery. G-1, Earth's trade minister, sat on Haiyan Wu's other side. She had stopped mid-sentence in her own notes. Her finger hovered over the screen for a moment, then she resumed writing. Her face showed nothing. The meeting continued. More decisions were made about things that affected human colonies. No one asked for human input. When the session ended 3 hours later, Haiyan Wu gathered his materials and left with his delegation. They walked through the crystal corridors in silence. That evening, Haiyan Wu sent a message back to Earth. It was brief and encrypted. The response came within hours. The next morning, he noticed something in his inbox. Withdrawal authorizations. Hundreds of them. All approved and ready for his signature. Over the next 2 weeks, something strange began happening across the galaxy. Human representatives stopped talking in council sessions. They still attended every meeting, sitting quietly in their designated areas. They took notes. They listened. But when asked for opinions, they simply said, "We have no comment at this time." G1 began submitting paperwork. Each day, another stack of documents appeared in the council's administrative system. Termination notices for joint projects, withdrawal forms for collaborative research, transfer requests for shared facilities. Every form was filled out perfectly, following every rule and regulation exactly. The council clerks processed the paperwork without much thought. Humans were always meticulous about documentation. This seemed normal enough. In the Andromeda sector, Dae Young oversaw the massive gate project that connected 5 different trade routes. He was the chief engineer, and his team of 43 humans had spent 6 years integrating the various alien technologies into one functional system. The project was nearly complete. On a Tuesday morning, Dae Young called a meeting with the project directors from the other species. He arrived with a data crystal containing every schematic, every line of code, every technical manual his team had created. "This contains all human contributions to the project," he said, placing the crystal on the table. "We're transferring everything to council servers. Our team will be departing at the end of the month." The Palaxian director stared at him. "Departing? The gate opens in 4 months. We need your team for the final integration." "The documentation is complete," Dae Young replied. "Everything you need is in the files." "We have confidence in your abilities." "But is there anything else?" Dae Young asked politely. There wasn't. The meeting ended. The Palaxian director filed a complaint with the council, but it went nowhere. Humans were allowed to leave projects. There was no rule against it. This pattern repeated across the galaxy. Human doctors submitted their resignations from medical stations. Human teachers completed their current terms and declined to renew contracts. Human engineers finished their assigned tasks and requested transfers back to human space. No one shouted. No one protested. No one made demands. They simply stopped participating. Space Station Meridian had been a joint construction project, with sections built by 12 different species. The human quarter was a marvel of efficient design, housing the environmental systems that kept the entire station's atmosphere balanced. One morning, the station commander woke to find construction ships attaching to the human sections. "What's happening?" She demanded over the communications channel. "We're detaching Module 7H, came the calm response from the construction chief, a human woman named Subin. Per Council Regulation 47B, each species retains ownership of their contributed modules. We're exercising our right to reclaim our property. You can't just take it. The station needs those systems. We've provided complete technical specifications for replacement systems," Subin said. "They're already in your database? The transition should take approximately 6 months if you start immediately. We'll maintain operations for another 30 days to give you time to begin." The module detached exactly 30 days later. The replacement systems were never quite as efficient. Back in the council chambers, an emergency session was called. Ambassador Velther stood at the podium again, but this time he looked annoyed rather than amused. "This is clearly a negotiation tactic," he announced to the assembly. "Humans are attempting to leverage their sudden absence to gain concessions. We should not reward this childish behavior." Councillor Cermak, an older member from the Valorian consensus, raised a tentacle. "Should we at least ask them what they want?" "They'll tell us when they're ready," Velther said dismissively. "Let them sulk for a while. They'll come back. They need the Council's protection, our trade networks, our resources. Where else would they go?" The Council agreed. It was obviously a bluff. Humans were a relatively young species, only 3 centuries in the galactic community. They couldn't survive on their own. This was just posturing. Hyun Woo received a recording of the session. He watched it alone in his quarters, then deleted it. The next day, he submitted more withdrawal notices. Human colonies across the frontier began closing their public spaceports to non-human traffic. Not banned exactly, just ... Closed for renovations, indefinitely. The colonies still traded, but now only through designated commercial hubs. Casual visits stopped. The Council sent official inquiries. What did humanity want? What were their demands? The responses came back, each one polite and formal. Humanity thanks the Council for their concern. We are currently focusing on internal development. We wish you well in your endeavors. No anger. No accusations. No demands for apology or recognition. Just silence, and slowly, quietly, without anyone quite noticing when it started, humans began to disappear from galactic life. The artists stopped coming to the exhibitions. The musicians stopped touring. The poets stopped publishing in the multi-species anthologies. The galaxy continued turning. The Council continued meeting. Business went on as usual. No one realized yet that anything important had changed, but in a few months they would notice. In a few months, things would start to break, and there would be no humans there to fix them, because humans had finally learned a lesson that took 300 years to accept. They had learned that some people only notice what you give them after you stop giving it. Hayan-Wu sat in his apartment on the council station, packing his belongings. His 7 years of service were ending. He had 1 more week, then he would return to Earth. He felt no satisfaction, no vindication. Just a quiet sadness that it had come to this. His datapad chimed. Another message from Earth? Another list of completed withdrawals? Another step toward separation. He acknowledged the message and continued packing. 3 months had passed since the last human delegation left the council station. The chamber felt no different. The debates continued, the votes were cast, and decisions were made. Life in the Galactic Council went on exactly as it always had. Then the trade network crashed. It started small. A few transactions failed to process. Then a few more. By the end of the week, the entire Nexus trade network was experiencing delays. By the end of the month, whole sectors were going dark for hours at a time. Quan was a Torellian technician who had worked in the Network Operations Center for 12 years. She stared at the cascading errors on her screen, her 4 eyes blinking in confusion. The system was degrading, but she couldn't figure out why. She called in her supervisor. Together they traced the problem back through the code, following the logic chains deeper and deeper into the system's core architecture. That's where they found it. The adaptive algorithms that kept the network stable across thousands of different technological standards. weren't written in any language Quan recognized. The comments in the code were in English. "Get me the original design team," Quan said. Her supervisor checked the records. The lead architect was ... human, name's Yuna. The whole core team was human, actually. Where are they now? Gone, all transferred back to human space 4 months ago. Quan felt a cold sensation run through her body. Did they leave documentation? They had mountains of it. But documentation could only explain what the code did, not why it was designed that way. The humans had built something elegant and self-maintaining, and now it was slowly falling apart because no one understood the underlying principles well enough to fix it. The trade network issues were annoying, but not catastrophic. Not yet. The council formed a committee to study the problem. They were certain they could solve it. Then the military exercises began. Admiral Throck commanded the Council Defense Fleet, a position he had held with pride for 20 years. He ran war games every quarter to keep his forces sharp. This quarter's exercise should have been routine. It became a disaster. The simulation systems crashed within the first hour. Tactical displays showed contradictory information. Communication protocols between different species ships became garbled. Ships that should have been coordinating their movements were operating on completely different tactical frameworks. Throck stood on his command deck, watching his fleet fall into chaos during what should have been a simple training scenario. If this had been a real battle, they would have been slaughtered. What happened? He demanded. His operations officer was a young Keldon named Mortek. He had been reviewing the system logs for hours. "Sir, our tactical integration software was designed by human consultants. They retired it last year, and we brought in our own programmers to maintain it. But what? Sir, they didn't just write the software. They redesigned our entire tactical doctrine to account for how different species think about combat. The software was just the interface. The real integration was conceptual." Throck understood immediately. Humans didn't think like Keldons, who favored direct assault. They didn't think like Valorians, who preferred defensive formations. Humans thought ... differently, creatively. They saw patterns that other species missed. And somehow they had woven all these different approaches into a coherent whole without them. The fleet was just a collection of ships that happened to be in the same space. "Find me a human tactical consultant," Throck ordered. "Sir, they're all gone?" Every single one resigned and left council space. Throck sat down heavily in his command chair. Then we're in trouble. The problems kept emerging. A plague broke out on the mining colonies of Tertius VII. It was nasty but treatable, the kind of thing that medical teams handled routinely. But when the council's medical response team arrived, their equipment wouldn't work. Dr. Narration was in charge of the response. She was one of the best physicians in the galaxy, trained in multiple species medical traditions. But she stood in the makeshift hospital on Tertius VII, holding a medical scanner that refused to calibrate. "It's the interface protocols," one of her technicians explained. "These scanners were designed to work with multiple species, but the translation software isn't recognizing the Tertius colonists' biology correctly. Who designed the scanners?" "Human biotech specialists, about 15 years ago. They were supposed to be universal." Narration felt sick. "Get them on a call, now." But the human specialists were gone. Every single one of them had left their positions. The messages sent to them went unanswered. The equipment sat useless while people died from a disease that should have been easy to cure. They eventually got old equipment that worked, but it took 2 weeks. 3,000 colonists died in those 2 weeks. Deaths that could have been prevented. The council started to worry. Economic problems came next. Commodity prices began swinging wildly. Markets that had been stable for decades suddenly became unpredictable. Fortunes were made and lost overnight. Small colonies found themselves unable to afford basic supplies as prices fluctuated. Beyond any reasonable pattern, the council's economic advisors scrambled to understand what was happening. They discovered that the financial prediction systems, the ones that had prevented market crashes for the past 50 years, were degrading. The artificial intelligence that managed them had been trained by human economists who understood both logic and what they called market psychology. Without regular updates from those economists, the AI was making predictions based on outdated models. It was still intelligent, but it no longer understood the market the way it once had. Attempts to contact the human economists went nowhere. Automated responses thanked the council for their interest and politely declined to provide assistance. Counselor Velther called another emergency session. He stood at the podium, his blue skin now looking pale even under the bright lights. We need to address the human situation. Their absence is causing difficulties. Difficulties? Cermaka's tentacles waved in agitation. Counselor, we're facing systemic failures across multiple critical systems. This goes beyond difficulties. Then we send a delegation to Earth. We offer them whatever they want to return. Do we know what they want? Asked a representative from the Palaxian Assembly. Silence filled the chamber. No one knew. Humans had never made demands. They had just left. Send the message anyway, Velther ordered. They'll tell us their price? The message was composed carefully. It acknowledged the Council's need for human expertise. It offered favorable trade terms, increased representation, access to restricted technologies. It was, by any measure, a generous offer. The response came back 3 days later. It was brief and polite. Humanity thanks the Galactic Council for their generous offer. At this time, we are focused on internal development and are not seeking external commitments. We wish you success in your endeavors. No counterproposal. No negotiation. Just a polite refusal. Velther read the message 5 times. They're bluffing. They have to be. But as more weeks passed, it became clear that humans weren't bluffing. They simply didn't care about the Council's offers anymore. The Galactic communication array started experiencing blackouts. Whole regions would lose contact for hours or days at a time. The technicians tried to fix it, but the array was an incomprehensibly complex network spanning thousands of worlds. It had been designed by a human named Jahi, who had spent 30 years creating redundancy systems that could root around any failure. No one else understood how she had done it. The array worked, or at least it had worked, and that had been enough. Now it was failing, and the technicians could only patch problems as they appeared. Never understanding the deeper issues, cultural events began feeling empty. The grand exhibition, held every 2 years, open to disappointing crowds. Critics noted that something felt missing. The art was technically proficient, but somehow less inspiring than previous years. It took weeks before someone realized there were no human artists represented. No human musicians. No human poets. For 300 years, humans had been contributing to galactic culture. Their stories, their music, their perspective on existence. It had woven itself into the cultural fabric so thoroughly that no one had noticed it. Was there until it WASN single quotes. Ambassador Cermak sat in his quarters, reading reports. His species had always been friendly with humans. He had worked with human diplomats for decades. He had considered some of them friends. He drafted a personal message to Haiyan Wu, the former Earth ambassador. It wasn't an official communication, just one person reaching out to another. He asked, simply, why? Why had they left? What had the Council done to drive them away? The response came a week later. It was also personal, also unofficial. We didn't leave because of one thing, Haiyan Wu wrote. We left because of 300 years of small things. Every dismissive comment. Every ignored suggestion. Every time we were useful but not valued. We gave everything we had, and in return we were tolerated. We finally realized that tolerance isn't enough. So we're done. No anger, Cermak, just done. Cermak read the message and felt something he rarely experienced. Shame, deep, profound shame. He finally understood. The Council hadn't driven humans away with cruelty. They had driven them away with indifference. And that somehow was worse. 6 months after the humans left, the galaxy was falling apart. The galactic communication array suffered its worst failure yet. Entire sectors went dark for 3 full days. Colonies lost contact with their homeworlds. Trade ships drifted without navigation updates. Panic spread as people wondered if this was the new normal. Jae-hee had built the array's redundancy systems over 3 decades. She had designed them to survive almost any disaster, to route around failures automatically, to heal themselves when damaged. The system was a masterpiece of engineering that had won her a dozen awards. Awards she had accepted with quiet humility, while other species took credit for implementing her designs. Now those systems were failing. The technicians tried everything they knew, but Jae-hee's designs worked on principles they didn't fully understand. She hadn't just built a communication network. She had built something that thought about communication the way humans did. Adaptable and creative and resilient, when the array came back online after those 3 days, it was working at 60% capacity. And it was getting worse. In the cultural centers across the galaxy, people were noticing something else missing. The Meridian Consortium held its annual diplomatic gala, an event that brought together artists and leaders from hundreds of worlds. Ambassador Soracle attended as she had for 20 years, but this year felt wrong. The music was technically perfect but emotionally flat. The art on display was competent but uninspiring. The poetry readings were well delivered but forgettable. Soracle walked through the exhibition halls, trying to understand what had changed. Then it hit her. There were no humans. No human musicians playing their strange instruments. No human painters showing their interpretation of alien worlds. No human poets reading their observations about the galaxy. She had never realized how much color humans had brought to these events. Their art wasn't always the most technically skilled, but it had something the other species struggled to create. It had heart. It had questions. It had a perspective that came from being relative newcomers to the galaxy, still amazed by everything they saw. Without that perspective, the gala felt like going through motions. Beautiful motions, but empty ones. Soracle left early. She went home and pulled up her collection of music. Half of it, she realized, was either human-made or human-influenced. She played a piece by a human composer named Minsu, a symphony that had been written after the composer visited the crystal caves of Valorian Prime. It blended human orchestral traditions with Valorian tonal harmonics. She had listened to this piece 100 times. She had never thought to thank the composer. He had just been part of the background, creating beauty that everyone enjoyed but few acknowledged. She checked the database. Minsu had returned to Earth 8 months ago. He was no longer accepting commissions. At the Grand Research Institute, the quarterly innovation report was released. Director Corton was a young Palaxian researcher, brilliant and dedicated. He read the report with growing alarm. Innovation rates had dropped 73% across all fields. Breakthrough discoveries were down by 84%. The number of cross-species research teams still operating had fallen by half, and those remaining were producing ordinary results. Corton started investigating. He was a scientist, trained to look for patterns and causes. What he found disturbed him deeply. Humans had been part of almost every major research breakthrough in the past century. Not always the lead researchers, but always there, asking questions that other species didn't think to ask. What if we tried this differently? Have we considered this angle? Why does it have to work that way? Professor Hiro had been one of those humans. He was a xenobiologist who led cross-species research teams studying adaptation and evolution. His teams had discovered new medical treatments, new agricultural techniques, and new ways of understanding how life developed across different worlds. Hiro's specialty wasn't just biology. It was getting different species to work together, to share ideas, to challenge each other's assumptions. He had a gift for seeing what each species brought to a problem and combining those perspectives into something greater than the sum of its parts. He had retired and returned to Earth 9 months ago. His research team had continued working, but their productivity had fallen to almost nothing. They knew how to do research, but they didn't know how to think the way Hiro had taught them to think. Corton dug deeper into the Institute's archives. He found something that made his heart sink. Thousands of reports filed by humans over the past 3 centuries. Reports about single points of failure in critical systems. offers to train researchers from other species, requests for collaborative oversight committees, warnings about over-reliance on any one species, expertise. Every single report had been stamped with the same notation: unnecessary. Current systems adequate? Filed away and forgotten. The humans had tried to prepare the galaxy for their potential absence. They had offered to share their knowledge more widely, to build true redundancy into the systems they created. And every time the Council had dismissed their concerns, Corton sat alone in his office, surrounded by printouts of these archived reports. He felt sick. This wasn't a sudden crisis. This was a predictable disaster that humans had spent centuries trying to prevent. The military situation grew worse. The Void Pirates, a loose collection of raiders that had been a minor nuisance for decades, suddenly became a serious threat. They attacked a Council supply convoy and destroyed half the escort fleet. Admiral Throck sat in his command center, reviewing the battle recordings. The tactics the Council fleet had used were textbook perfect. They should have worked. But the pirates had adapted, had used unconventional strategies that exploited weaknesses in the standard approach. He recognized those tactics. They were human-inspired. Creative, unpredictable, willing to break the rules to achieve victory. The kind of thinking that humans had brought to Council. Military operations for generations. Throck had relied on human tactical advisors for his entire career. They never commanded ships or gave direct orders. They just offered suggestions. Quiet observations about what an enemy might do. Alternative approaches that hadn't been considered. Small adjustments that won battles. He had never realized how dependent he had become on those whispered suggestions until they were gone. Another convoy was attacked. Then another. The Void Pirates were growing bolder, and the Council fleet was suffering defeats for the first time in living memory. THROK sent urgent messages to the Council. They needed help. They needed new tactics. They needed humans, but humans weren't answering. The Council convened an emergency session. The chamber was full. Representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered to address the mounting crisis. The mood was grim. Species pointed fingers at each other. The Orions blamed the Keldans for poor military leadership. The Keldans blamed the Palaxians for the research failures. The Palaxians blamed the Taurelians for the technical breakdowns. Everyone blamed someone else. Council. Velther stood at the podium, trying to maintain order. His confidence from months ago had vanished. Now he just looked tired. We need to make humanity return, he said. We can order them back. Require their participation. With what authority? Cermak asked quietly. What law gives us the right to compel their service? They're part of the Council? Are they? They fulfilled all their obligations before leaving. They followed every regulation. They broke no laws. They simply stopped volunteering. The word hung in the air, volunteering. That's what humans had been doing for 300 years. Volunteering their expertise, their creativity, their labor, and the Council had accepted it all as if it was owed to them. Then we negotiate, Velther said. We offer them concessions. Better trade terms. More Council seats. Whatever they want. We already tried that, another counselor pointed out. They said no, everyone has a price. Cermak's tentacles drooped. I don't think you understand. They don't want our concessions. They don't want our trade terms. They don't want anything from us anymore. That's the point. We treated them as useful tools, and tools don't get to have wants. So they stopped being our tools. Then what do they want? Velther's voice rose in frustration. I think, Cermak said quietly, they wanted us to see them as equals, as partners, as people whose contributions mattered not because they were useful, but because they were valuable in themselves. Silence fell across the chamber. One by one, counselors began to understand. Corton stood up from his seat in the research section. He was junior, barely qualified to speak in the full council, but he did it anyway. I've been reviewing our archives, he said. I found something I think you all need to see. He projected the files onto the main display. Thousands of human reports, Decades of warnings. Centuries of offers to help prepare for this exact situation. They tried to tell us, Corton said. They tried to help us build systems that wouldn't fail if they left. We ignored them. Every single time we ignored them. Representatives stared at the evidence. The truth was undeniable. So what do? Someone asked. Cermak looked around the chamber. We do what we should have done 300 years ago. We apologize, genuinely, and then we ask, as equals, if they might consider working with us again. Not for us. With us? And if they say no? Velthar asked. Then we learn to survive without them, Cermak replied. And we accept that we earned that outcome. The council voted to send a delegation to Earth. It took 3 days of debate to decide who would go. In the end, they chose carefully. Not the most powerful counselors, but those who had actually worked alongside humans. Those who might understand what had gone wrong. Cermak would lead the delegation. He was old for a Valorian, his tentacles moving slower than they once had, but his mind was still sharp. He had been friendly with human diplomats for decades. If anyone could reach them, it might be him. Dr. Narration volunteered to join. The deaths on Tertius 7 haunted her. She had worked with human medical teams for years, had learned from them, had taught them in return. She needed to understand why they had left her without the tools to save those people. Corton asked to come as well. As the youngest member, he brought the research he had compiled. Evidence of what humanity had contributed. Evidence of how thoroughly the Council had ignored their warnings. The journey to Earth took 3 weeks on the fastest ship available. They spent that time reviewing records, trying to understand the scope of humanity's involvement in galactic civilization. Corton worked 18 hours a day, compiling data. The ship's computer struggled to categorize everything. Engineering, medicine, art, philosophy, conflict resolution, education, agriculture, logistics, linguistics, cultural exchange, scientific research, military strategy, economic analysis, entertainment, environmental management, and dozens of other fields. Just listing the categories took 2 full days of processing time. I didn't know, Narration said, looking at the data. I worked with humans for 30 years. I thought I knew what they contributed. But this is everything. Not everything, Cermak corrected gently. But they touched nearly everything. Like threads woven through fabric. You don't notice them until the fabric starts to unravel. They reached the Sol system on the 22nd day of travel. Defense Coordinator Donghayan met them at the border. His ship was sleek and modern, clearly human-made, but incorporating technologies from across the galaxy. The humans had learned from everyone, even if not everyone had learned from them. Welcome to Sol System, Donghayan said formally. I'll escort you to Earth. The journey inward showed them a system bustling with activity. Space stations orbited various planets and moons. Construction projects were everywhere. The system looked prosperous and busy, not at all like a civilization in retreat. You're building, Narration observed. We never stopped building, Donghayan replied. We just stopped building for others who didn't value the work. They landed at the capital city on Earth. The delegation was treated with perfect courtesy but no warmth. They were given comfortable quarters and told the human assembly would meet with them the following day. That night, Cermak couldn't sleep. He watched the city lights from his window. The city was beautiful, blending old human architecture with designs inspired by dozens of alien cultures. Humans had always been good at taking ideas from others and making something new. They called it adaptation. The council had called it imitation and dismissed it as unoriginal. The meeting took place in a simple chamber. No grand displays of power, no towering architecture meant to intimidate. Just a round table with comfortable chairs. Minji entered as first speaker of the human assembly. She was younger than Cermak expected, but her eyes were old. She had the look of someone who had seen too much disappointment. Thank you for coming to Earth, she said. Please tell us what brings you here. Cermak had prepared a speech. He had spent days crafting it, working through multiple drafts with the others. But sitting here, looking at Minji's weary eyes, the speech felt hollow. We came to apologize, he said simply. And to ask for your help, Minji gestured for him to continue. The galaxy is failing without you, Sir Muk said. Systems are breaking down. Research has stalled. Our military is suffering defeats. Our culture feels empty. We need you to come back. And what do you offer in return? Better trade terms? More representation in the council. Access to restricted technologies. Formal recognition of your contributions. Minji listened patiently. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Thank you for those offers, she said finally. But they don't address the real problem. What is the real problem? Narration asked. You still think this is about terms and conditions, Minji said. About what you can offer us to make us come back. You're treating this like a negotiation. But it's not a negotiation. It's a relationship. And the relationship was broken, then how do we fix it? Corton asked. Minji looked at the young Palaxian researcher. Tell me, when did you start noticing humans were gone? When the research reports showed the innovation decline, he admitted, and before that? When did you notice what humans contributed when we were there? Corton opened his mouth, then closed it. He hadn't. None of them had? For 300 years we offered partnership, Minji said. We shared our knowledge freely. We asked only to be included, to be respected, to be valued as equals. Instead, we were useful. Do you understand the difference? I'm beginning to, Sir Muk said quietly. We don't want your trade terms, Minji continued. We don't want token representation. We don't want to be bought back with concessions. We want what we always wanted. To be seen, to be heard. To matter as people, not as tools. The silence stretched. Narration spoke next, her voice breaking slightly. The people who died on Tertius 7, I could have saved them if I had understood the equipment properly. If I had paid attention when your people tried to teach me. I was so focused on using the tools that I never learned how they really worked. I'm sorry. I know, Minji said. We sent medical supplies when we heard about the outbreak. Older equipment that doesn't require the scanners. It arrived too late to help, but we sent it anyway. Why? Narration asked. After everything, why help at all? Because people were dying. What the council did to us doesn't change who we are. Against protocol, Byung-ho entered the chamber. He was Earth's cultural minister, a man with kind eyes and paint-stained hands. First speaker, if I may? He asked. Minji nodded. I'd like to show our guests something, Byung-ho said. If they're willing. The delegation agreed. What followed was a tour of human space that took several days. They visited colonies on Mars and the moons of Jupiter. They saw space stations where humans lived and worked. They visited universities and research centers. What struck them most was the vibrancy. Humans were creating, innovating, growing. Their art was everywhere, bright and alive. Their research centers buzzed with excited conversation. Their communities felt warm and connected. And everywhere they went, they saw something else. Humans were still teaching galactic history. Children learned about Valorian philosophy and Palaxian mathematics. Universities offered courses in Taurelian engineering and Keldan military theory. Human musicians performed compositions that blended a dozen different cultural traditions. The humans hadn't become isolated. They had just stopped being taken for granted. At a hospital on Europa, Dr. Subin showed them a research wing where human doctors were developing new treatments. Not for profit, but because healing people was what they did. You're still helping others, Narration whispered. We help those who ask respectfully and value the partnership, Subin said. The council taught us an important lesson. Never give what isn't valued. But that doesn't mean we stop being healers. We sent you requests for help, Narration said. You sent us demands, Subin corrected gently. There's a difference. You told us you needed our help fixing problems. You didn't ask if we would be willing to help. You assumed we would. You assumed we owed it to you, didn't you? The question came from Corton. We're all part of the same galaxy. Don't we owe each other help? Yes, Subin agreed. But help flows between equals. What you wanted was service from subordinates. and we're done being subordinates. On the last day of the tour, Byung-ho took them to a school. Young humans were being taught by teachers from half a dozen species. The students asked questions in multiple languages, learned mathematics from Palaxian teachers, studied art from Valorian instructors. A small human child raised her hand. Minister Byung-ho, why did we leave the council? Because they didn't appreciate what we gave them, Byung-ho said simply. But we came back to visit them, the child said, pointing at the delegation. We did. Because showing people their mistakes is the first step in helping them fix those mistakes. After the tour, the delegation met with Minji again. This time, Surmuk didn't have a speech prepared. He just spoke from his heart. I understand now, he said. You didn't leave because of one incident. You left because of 300 years of small cuts. Every time someone dismissed your ideas. Every time someone took credit for your work. Every time someone treated you as useful rather than valued. It accumulated until you couldn't take it anymore. Yes, Minji said. And now we've seen what you've built without us. You're thriving. You don't need the council. No, Minji agreed. We don't. So why should you come back? Minji smiled. It was a sad smile, but genuine. That's the right question, she said. Finally, someone asked the right question. The delegation returned to the council station 4 weeks after they had left. The chamber was packed when Surmuk stood to deliver his report. Representatives from 1,000 worlds waited to hear what he had learned, what humanity wanted, what it would cost to bring them back. Surmuk looked around the chamber. He had served here for 50 years. He had seen the council at its best and its worst. Today, he needed them to hear truth they wouldn't want to accept. Humanity doesn't need us, he began. They're not suffering. They're not struggling. They're thriving without the council. Their colonies are prosperous. Their research is advancing. Their culture is vibrant and alive. They don't need what we offer because they've built something better on their own. Murmurs filled the chamber. This wasn't what they expected to hear, so they won't return? Someone called out. I didn't say that, Surmuk replied. I said they don't need us. Whether they'll work with us again depends entirely on us, on whether we're willing to change. He activated the main display. Corton S. research appeared, showing the scope of human contributions over 3 centuries. The data was overwhelming. Every counselor could see how thoroughly humanity had woven itself into galactic civilization. This is what we lost, Surmuk said. Not because they failed us, because we failed them. For 300 years, humans tried to warn us about the systems we were building. They offered to train others. They asked for collaborative oversight. They wanted to ensure that no single species was essential to any critical function. The display shifted to show the archived reports. Thousands of them, all marked unnecessary and filed away. We ignored every warning, Surmuk continued. We took everything they gave and offered nothing but tolerance in return. We treated them as useful tools rather than valued partners. And when they finally left, we acted surprised. Corton stood from his seat. As the researcher who compiled the evidence, he had earned the right to speak. I'm young, he said. I wasn't here for most of this history. But I've studied it now. I've read the reports. I've seen the patterns, and I've learned something important. Humans didn't just contribute skills or knowledge. They contributed a way of thinking. They asked questions nobody else thought to ask. They saw connections nobody else noticed. They challenged assumptions nobody else questioned. Without that perspective, we're not just missing their skills. We're missing the ability to innovate. Narration stood next. 3,000 people died. On 37 because I didn't understand equipment that humans designed. But that's not why I'm haunted by those deaths. I'm haunted because humans sent medical supplies anyway. Old equipment that didn't require their advanced scanners. They sent it knowing it probably wouldn't arrive in time, knowing we had dismissed them, knowing we had taken them for granted. They sent it because saving lives mattered more than punishing us for our mistakes. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of other counselors. That's who humans are. They help because it's right, not because it benefits them. And we treated people like that as if they should be grateful we tolerated their presence. The debate began. It lasted for 3 days. Some counselors, like Velther, argued that apologizing would make the council look weak. Others argued for practical necessity that the galaxy needed human expertise regardless of pride or principle. Still others argued for apology on moral grounds alone. Younger counselors spoke up, those who had actually worked alongside humans. They told stories of late nights in research labs, of human colleagues who stayed to help them understand concepts, of human friends who celebrated their successes and helped them. Through failures, Lysa was a Torellian engineer who had worked under Quan. She stood and spoke in a voice shaking with emotion. My mentor Quan learned everything from human colleagues, she said. They didn't just teach her the technical skills. They taught her how to think about problems creatively, how to see solutions that weren't obvious, how to collaborate across species and cultures. And they did it without asking for recognition or reward. They did it because Quan asked for help and they valued her enough to give it. She paused, composing herself. Humans were never our servants. They were never our saviors. They were our friends, and we didn't notice until they were gone. If we don't apologize for that, if we don't genuinely change how we treat them, then we don't deserve their friendship back. The words hung in the air. Slowly, more counselors began to speak in support. Not everyone, but enough. The tide was turning. On the 4th day, the council voted. The motion was to send a formal apology to humanity and to invite them back. Not with demands or assumptions, but with a genuine request for renewed partnership. The vote passed, not unanimously, but with a strong majority. Those who voted against it, like Velther, did so quietly. Even they could see which way history was moving. Drafting the apology took another week. Every word was debated. It couldn't be hollow or political. It had to be genuine. Humans would see through anything less. The final message was simple. It acknowledged the Council's failures. It recognized how humanity had been dismissed and taken for granted. It offered no excuses. It simply asked if humans would be willing to discuss a new relationship built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. The message was sent. Then came the waiting. Weeks passed. The galaxy continued its slow deterioration. The trade network operated at reduced capacity. The defense fleet suffered another defeat against the Void Pirates. The communication array experienced more blackouts. But something had changed in the Council. The crisis had forced them to look at themselves honestly. Committee meetings began differently. When technical experts spoke, counselors actually listened. When warnings were raised, they were taken seriously. Small changes, but real ones. 3 months after the apology was sent, Minji appeared before the council. Not in person, but via hologram transmission. The chamber fell silent when her image materialized. The Human Assembly has reviewed the council's message, she said formally. We appreciate the apology. We recognize that it was difficult for the council to acknowledge its mistakes. That took courage, and we respect that courage. Counselors leaned forward, waiting. Humanity has decided to return, Minji continued. But not as we were before. We will participate as equals or not at all. We will share knowledge, but only in true collaboration. We will contribute our expertise, but our contributions must be acknowledged and valued. She paused, letting that sink in. We're transmitting a document with specific terms. We ask that you review them carefully before responding. The document arrived moments later. Cermak read through it quickly. Joint oversight committees with real decision-making authority. Formal recognition of contributions from all species. Cross-training requirements to prevent knowledge from being held by any single group. Protection against dismissive treatment. Systems for raising concerns without fear of being ignored. Velther was the first to object. These terms give humans unprecedented influence over council operations. No, Corton replied, reading through the document. These terms give all contributing species appropriate influence. They just formalize what should have always been true. That everyone's contributions matter. That expertise should be respected. That warnings should be heard. It's too much, Velther insisted. Is it? Cermak asked quietly. These terms would have prevented this entire crisis. If we'd had joint oversight committees, someone would have noticed the single points of failure. If we'd had cross-training requirements, we wouldn't have lost critical knowledge when humans left. If we'd had protection against dismissive treatment, humans might never have felt the need to leave. You're saying we should accept their demands? I'm saying these aren't demands. They're the basic requirements of a healthy partnership. And if we can't accept that, then we don't deserve their return. The debate lasted 2 more days. But this time, the outcome was never really in doubt. The galaxy had learned its lesson, even if some individuals hadn't. The vote passed with an even stronger majority than the apology had received. Minji appeared again to acknowledge the Council's acceptance. Humanity will begin returning to collaborative projects within the month. We'll start small, rebuilding trust gradually. This won't be quick or easy. But if both sides commit to genuine partnership, we believe it can work. What if we fail? Velther asked. What if old patterns reassert themselves? Minji's expression was serious. Then we'll leave again. But this time, we won't wait 300 years. We've learned that lesson. Respect must be maintained, not just offered once and forgotten. The chamber was quiet. Everyone understood. Humanity wasn't returning out of desperation or because they needed the Council. They were returning because the Council had finally demonstrated willingness to change. But that willingness would have to be proven continuously. 5 years passed. The galaxy looked different now. Humans worked alongside other species in collaborative ventures that none could have achieved alone. The Galactic Communication Array was rebuilt by teams from 7 different species, each one understanding the full system. No more single points of failure. No more irreplaceable experts. Jae-hee returned to lead the communications team. But now she worked with Torellian engineers, Palaxian systems analysts, and Keldon security specialists who all understood the principles behind the designs. She taught them not just how to maintain the system, but why it worked the way it did. Professor Hiro published a groundbreaking study on cross-species medical treatments. The paper had 12 co-authors from 6 different species, each contributing equally. The research won awards across the galaxy, and this time, everyone's contribution was acknowledged in the citations. In the council chambers, Ambassador Hyenwu stood to speak on a proposal about resource distribution. The chamber fell silent to listen. Not because humans had threatened anyone or demanded attention, because over 5 years they had earned respect by consistently offering valuable insights and treating others as true partners. When Hyenwu finished speaking, the debate began. His suggestions were challenged, refined, improved through collaborative discussion. Some were accepted, some were rejected, all were considered seriously. That evening, Cermak invited Hyenwu for dinner. They had become genuine friends over the past 5 years. They talked about the day's debates, about upcoming projects, about their families. Do you think it will last? Cermak asked. This new way of working together. Hyenwu considered the question. I think it will last as long as everyone remembers what we almost lost. The moment we start taking each other for granted again, the moment we stop actively maintaining respect and partnership, we'll start sliding backward. That's a sobering thought. It's a realistic thought. Good relationships require constant effort. The galaxy learned that lesson the hard way. I just hope we don't forget it. In a classroom on Earth, Byung-ho taught a group of students from a dozen different species. A young Palaxian raised her hand. Minister Byung-ho, why did humans come back to the council after they treated you so badly? Byung-ho smiled. He had answered this question many times over the years, but it never got old. Because isolation isn't the answer to being undervalued, he said. Teaching others to do better is. We left to show the galaxy what it was losing. We returned to show what it could become when everyone works together as true equals. But what if they hadn't changed? A human student asked. Then we would have stayed away. Sometimes the best way to help people is to let them experience the consequences of their choices. The council had to learn to value partnership by losing it. Fortunately, they learned the lesson. Not everyone does. The class ended. Students filed out, heading to their next lessons. Humans, Valorians, Palaxians, Keldans, all learning together. All valued equally. The galaxy had changed. Not perfectly. Not completely. But genuinely. And that, perhaps, was the real lesson. Change was possible, even after centuries of mistakes. But it required crisis, honesty, and willingness to do better. Humanity had given the galaxy all three. In return, they finally received what they had always deserved. Not tolerance. Not utility. But genuine respect and partnership. And across 1,000 worlds, beings of every species worked together to build something better than any of them could have built alone.